Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and I'm back with the 27th game of the book Logical Chess Move by Move by Irving Chernev. This game was played between Chekhover and Rudakovsky in 1945 in Moscow. In this game, White played magnificently and never once relaxed of his iron control of the game. The game and the opening played was Queen's Gambit declined. So without further ado, let's start. White started with d4, occupies the center and controls c5 and e5 square, and also making way for the bishop and the queen to come out. Now black replied with d5, the simplest way to stop white from gaining more ground in the center by playing e4. So also the d5 pawn push controls half of the center and makes way for the c8 bishop and the queen to come out. After this, white played c4. The objective of this move is to destroy black's pawn center. White offers a pawn to induce black to surrender the center. If that does not work, white threatens to dissolve it by taking the pawn. C takes d5. Black replied with e6. Black defends the center pawn so that if white captures with c pawn, black can recapture with e pawn and still control the center. With e6, black makes way for the f8 bishop to develop. Now white played knight f3, developing towards the center, following the main principle in the openings as said by Capablanca, which is rapid and efficient development. Black played knight f6. Black too develops towards the center and adds its weight to the protection of d5. It is a good policy to mobilize the kingside pieces first, since only two of them need be developed to make castling possible. White played bishop to g5 and develops and pins the f6 knight. Black played bishop e7, develops and unpins the knight in a proper way. The inexperienced player often grows impatient and drives the bishop off by playing h6. White goes bishop h4 and then g5. Then white will play bishop g3 only to find that he has ruined the pawn position on the king side as a result of his violent action. So this is not a good idea for black to play like this. So better way is to unpin the knight like this. Now white played e3, strengthens his pawn center and frees his f1 bishop, which also protects the c4 pawn. Now black played short castle. Black gets his king into safety before revealing his plans for the development of the queenside pieces. White played knight c3, develops and takes an active part in the struggle for the control of the center. Now black played knight b d7. This knight must never be developed at c6 before the c pawn is moved. The pawn must be free either to advance to c5 and fight for equal rights in the center, or to move one square to c6 where it supports the d5 pawn, black's own center. But the pawn must not be obstructed by knight c6. Black's position is cramped for the moment, but the knight is ready to support a liberating movement and an attack on white's center by c5 or by e5. So this knight is controlling these two squares as well. Now white played queen c2, a magnificent square for white's queen. From c2, the queen exerts her powerful influence in several directions on the partly open c file and on the center, and preventing black from freeing himself by knight e4. After this, black played c6. This move provides solid support to the center pawn and gives the queen access to the queen side. It looks substantial enough, but the more aggressive pawn move c5, disputing control of the center by establishing a state of tension there, might be more to the point. The danger in delaying c5 is that black may never again have a favorable opportunity to get in this thrust. Instead of c6, had black played knight to e4, this attempt to force some exchanges and shake off the pressure is refuted by bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, c takes d5, knight takes c3. And instead of knight takes c3, if e takes d5, knight takes d5, white wins on spot. And after c takes d5, knight takes c3, queen takes c3, e takes d5, queen takes c7. Let's say queen b4 check and queen c3, and white has won a pawn. So after queen c2, black played c6 instead of knight e4. White replied with bishop d3, develops and points it at black's king side and is ready to castle instantly on either wing. Now black played d takes c4. Black waited for white to move his f1 bishop before making this capture. Otherwise, the bishop recaptures and develops at the same time. Black's intention is clearing the d5 square, is to swing his knight over to that square and force some exchanges and free his cramped position. So after d takes c4, white played bishop takes c4. White is content with the result of the pawn exchange. Lines are opened which increase the mobility of his pieces. Now black played knight d5 to compel white to exchange bishops. White played bishop takes e7. Safer than bishop f4. If white plays bishop f4, then knight takes f4, e takes f4. When white is left with an isolated d pawn, the pawn itself is in no great danger, but the d5 square is in front of it is in danger. It is in danger of being occupied indefinitely by one of black's pieces. A piece stationed on a square in front of an isolated pawn can never be driven off by enemy pawns. So after knight d5, white played bishop takes e7 and black captured queen takes e7. The proper recapture, letting the queen come into play, taking with the knight would be developing backwards. White played short castle, puts the king into safety while the rooks get in touch with each other. Black played b5, attacks the bishop and also makes way for the c8 bishop to develop. Now white played bishop e2. The bishop retreats but not to d3, where an attack by knight b4 enables black to bring about an exchange of knight for bishop. White wants to preserve the bishop, which has excellent prospects for attack when it emerges later at d3 or f3. Even better was, instead of bishop e2, knight takes d5. Let's say black captures with e takes d5 and then bishop d3 gains one of the pawns. And instead of e takes d5, if black replies with c takes d5, then bishop takes b5, gaining a pawn. So white played bishop e2. Now black replied with a6, protecting the b pawn so that the c pawn is free to attack white's center. If black can get in c5, he will still have a respectable game. Now white played knight e4, a good move, uncovering an attack. The queen attacks the c pawn, while the knight restrains it from advancing to c5. White's idea is to prevent the freeing move c5 forever and then barricade black completely to plant a piece by planting a piece at c5. Now black replied with bishop to b7, develops and protects the c pawn. Now white played knight e5. Before setting a piece on c5, white plays to get rid of one of the guardians of that square, black's knight at d7. If he plays knight c5 at once, then knight takes c5, queen takes c5, queen takes c5, d takes c5, leaves him with a pawn occupying the c5 square. This does not have the same effect as a piece standing on that square. A pawn is immobile and does little to restrain the opponent, but a piece radiates power in all directions and has a terribly cramping effect on the enemy's movements in the whole surrounding area. So white played knight e5. Now black played rook c8, rook a c8, developing another piece and defending the pawn which was attacked by two pieces. Now white played knight takes d7, removing one of the pieces, guarding the vital c5 square. Queen takes d7, and now white played knight c5. With the domination of this square, white's advantage is decisive in the strategic sense. As of now, it's attacking the queen. Black played queen c7. Both queen and bishop were attacked, so the queen stays near the bishop. Now white played rook f d1. Rooks are most efficient when they control open lines. When there are no open files, then the rooks should be placed on partly open files or on files likely to be opened. When none of these files seems to exist, then the rooks should be brought to the center to exert pressure on the center files. But the rooks must be developed. Now black played rook c d8. There are various reasons for this move. The rook has no future on the c file, while the pawn at c6 impedes its movements. There is little prospect of the pawn coming to life. So the rook vacates c8 for the bishop, and the bishop cannot stay indefinitely at b7, where it is hampered by the c pawn, and where the queen is tied down to its defense. Now, white played rook ac1. White's incidental threat of winning a pawn by knight takes b7 and then queen takes c6. Now, black played bishop to c8. Black parries the threat of knight takes b7 and frees his queen from the job of watching over the bishop. Now, he can speculate on getting some counterplay by the break e5. Now white played queen to e4. Magnificent centralization by the queen, who prevents e5 and prepares to switch over for a kingside attack. Now black played knight to f6. The best defender of the castled king returns to f6, incidentally with an attack on the queen. Now white played queen h4. The queen evades the knight's threat and swings over to the king side to get an attack rolling against the king. Black played queen a5. Black tries to counterattack on the queen side, mostly to distract his opponent's attention. The break in the center by e5, had black played e5, which he contemplated making, is risky to say the least, as queen g3 in reply, pinning the pawn, is troublesome. So black played queen a5. Now white played a3. The simplest way to save the pawn and to keep the queen from moving to b4. Now black played pawn to b4, hoping to disrupt white's queen side by continuing with b takes a4. White replied with a4. White avoids any exchanges that might let the queen set foot in his territory. Now black played knight d7. Trying to shake off the grip of the knight, which is strangling his queen side to death. If he waits too long, white pursues with bishop d3, followed by g4 to dislodge the knight from f6, which guards against the checkmate. After the compulsory h6, white plays g5, forcing an exchange of pawns which opens the g file. Then white can shift his king to h1 and swing a rook over to attack on the open file. Against this, black could not hold out very long. So that is why black played knight d7. Now white played d3, defending the a4 pawn and relieving the knight of that task. Now black played knight takes c5. This is hardly anything better. The tempting move e5 succumbs to knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, rook c5, queen c7, and rook takes e5 wins white a pawn. So after b3, black played knight takes c5. White played rook takes c5. The exchange of the knights results in white's substituting another piece at c5, maintaining his grip on the position. Now black played queen b6, preferable to queen c7, because if black plays queen c7, then rook d c1 attacking the c6 pawn, bishop b7 saving a6 and c6, pawn to a5 to isolate the b pawn by preventing black's pawn move to a5. And white follows up by rook 1 c4 and rook takes b4. So black played queen b6 and now white played rook d c1. Doubling rooks on an open file more than doubles the pressure on the file and on the opponent. White's immediate threat is rook takes c6. Now black played bishop to b7. Black guards the pawn, but the bishop's mobility is almost nil. Pieces that are free and untrammeled not only have more striking power in the portion of the board they occupy, but they also control and limit the activities of the enemy. They can also reach other parts of the board easily. Let us compare all the moves the pieces on each side can make, the range of their action. The white king can move two moves, whereas the black king only one. The white queen has like 12 moves. It can move like any direction from here, 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 and here. And the black queen only 5. Here, here, and here. So, and the c1 rook has 8 moves. Here, here, and here. And the f8 rook only 1. The c5 rook has 11 moves, like here, here, and here, and also this way. While the d8 rook has 8 moves. This side, and here. And white bishop can make 9 moves, and the black bishop only 2. So here, white bishop can make like 9 moves, and the black bishop only 2. So total moves white can make with pieces is 42 and black is just 17. So white pieces are 250% as efficient as black. Now white played a5 in order to isolate black's b pawn, incidentally drive the queen back to the second rank. Now black played queen to a7. On the alternative queen c7, white can either resume operations on the king side or go after a pawn on the queen side by bishop f3, rook c8, rook 1 c4 followed by rook takes b4. But white played after queen a7, now white played bishop to d3. Now that the queen side is fixed, white turns his attention to the king side and threatens checkmate on the next move. Black can easily dispose this threat, but only by moving one of the pawns near his king, and thereby creating a weakness which is permanent and irremediable. Now black played g6. Now black has weaknesses on the dark squares and in his position and holds in his position. If had black played h6, then queen e4 forces g6. White could continue with rook h5 and then king g7. Let's say king h7, then queen f4 and wins. And after king g7, queen e5 check, f6. And if king h7, then queen g5, again white wins. So after f6, then queen g3, attacking the g6 pawn, and then g5. And now white can play rook takes h6. When king captures, queen h3 check, king g7 and queen h7 checkmate. And instead of g5, if black plays f5, then queen e5 check, king h7, queen c7 check, king g8 and rook takes h6 and white wins. Another simpler way is playing h4, threatening to break up the pawns by h5. If black replies with h5 to stop the advance of the pawn, white can either snap the h pawn off with his rook or keep hammering away by g4, h takes d4 and h5, and white has a winning game. So black played g6 and now white played queen f6, occupying securely one of the holes created by black's g6 advance. The f6 and h6 are weak squares because they are no longer under the surveillance of a pawn and is vulnerable to invasion by an enemy piece. White's plan now is to just push the h pawn to h4, followed by h5, followed by h6, and followed by checkmate at g7, queen g7. So if after the pawn reaches h5, it is captured en route, then checkmate by the rook is the instant punishment. Rook g5 and checkmate. So that is the plan white has done now. So after queen f6, and that's a good move. Now black played rook d6. Black vacates the d8 square so that his queen can return to that square and challenge white's queen. White played queen e7, an attack on the exposed rook so that black will have his hands full warding off the accumulating threats. Black has three problems, each on a different board. On the king side, he must guard against getting checkmated. On the queen side, he must release himself from white's stranglehold. In the middle, he must rescue any pieces that are loose. So here black played rook f d8. If instead queen b8, then bishop e4, rook c8, h4, queen c7, queen f6, queen d8, queen takes d8 check, rook c takes d8. Now either bishop takes c6 or rook 1 c4 followed by rook takes b4. So black played rook f d8. Now white played h4. White still aiming for checkmate by h5, h6 and then queen f6 and followed by queen g7 checkmate. Now black played rook 8 d7. Attacks the queen but not with rook 6 d7 as he wants the first rank and d8 square available to his own queen. So after rook 8 d7, now white played queen f6. The danger of checkmate becomes more acute. Queen a8. The queen retreats to rush towards the king side. If black tries with rook d5 to stop white from playing h5, white can dislodge the rook by bishop to e4. So black played queen a8. Now white played bishop e4, not at once h5 because of queen to d8. If white plays pawn to h5, then queen d8 in reply. After this move, if black plays queen d8 now, then black will be trying to exchange the queens. So queen d8 check, exchanging queens and taking the c pawn. So after bishop e4, now black played queen e8, hoping to lure white into capturing bishop takes c6. Then bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, rook takes c6, and rook takes c6, then rook takes d4, regains the pawn and gives him fighting chances, although it is still better for white. So after bishop e4, queen e8. Black could not play queen d8 because of queen d8 check and exchanging queens and taking the c pawn. So after bishop e4, now black played queen e8 and h5. Pawn is headed for h6. Instead of h5, had white played bishop takes c6, we already saw that takes, and rook takes d4. So that's why white played h5 and now black played rook d8 to have the queen support the c6 pawn. Now white played bishop takes c6, a good move. Since the black queen, one of the defenders of the pawn, is overworked, as the queen also has to keep an eye out for checkmate, it is safe to capture this pawn. Black played bishop takes c6. Black must recapture, otherwise he loses some piece since two pieces are attacked. Now white played h6 with a checkmate threat at g7. Now black played king f8. If had black played queen f8, then rook takes c6, threatening to play rook takes d6, and then rook takes d6, rook c8, attacking the queen takes c8, and queen g7, checkmate. So after queen f8, rook takes c6. If here black plays queen takes h6, then rook takes d6, rook takes d6, rook c8, check, and black must give up his queen. So that's why black did not play queen f8, he played king f8, and now white played rook takes c6, regains the piece and threatens rook takes d6, rook takes d6, and rook c8, pinning the queen. Now after this, black played rook takes c6. There is not much choice. If black plays queen d7 instead of rook takes c6, then rook c7, attacking the queen. When the queen moves away, then queen h8 checkmate, or queen g7 checkmate. So after rook takes c6, white played rook takes c6. White recaptures and prepares to play rook c7, followed by checkmate at queen g7 by queen g7. Now black played rook d7, controls the 7th rank. Had black played queen takes c6, then queen takes d8 check, queen e8, queen d6 check, king g8, and now queen takes a6, queen e7, and then queen b6, and the passed pawn cannot be stopped. And after queen d6 check, here if black plays queen e7, then queen takes a6, king e8, let's say the king is coming towards the queenside pawns, then queen c8 check, queen d8, queen takes d8 check, king takes d8, with a winning king pawn ending for white. So after rook d7, now white played rook c8, sacrifices the rook, but white missed a brilliant variation, which is queen g7 check, king e7 only move, then rook takes e6 check, king d8, but what if king takes the rook? Then queen e5 and checkmate. So after king d8, rook takes e8 check, king takes e8, queen takes h7, followed by pawn promotion and win. But white played rook c8, that is also a good move. Now black had to capture, queen takes c8, and now white played queen h8, and it's a skewer. White will be gaining the queen, and black resigned. So from this game, we learned some more principles, such as occupy the center with pawns, rapid piece development towards the center. It is a good policy to mobilize the kingside pieces first, since only two of them need be developed to make castling possible. Castle as early as possible. A piece stationed on a square in front of an isolated pawn can never be driven off by enemy pawns. Place your rooks on open files or on files likely to be opened. When none of these files seems to exist, then the rooks should be brought to the center to exert pressure on the center files. I hope you learned something from this game as well. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Also follow me on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. All the links are given in the description. Thank you. See you in the next video. Bye.